Number 1. When I was younger, I had an imaginary friend who lived in this massive antique dresser. We'd chill out, and I vividly remember him telling me stories, although I have absolutely no recollection of what they actually were. I remember one day talking to my parents about it. My dad traveled quite a bit, so he wasn't up to date with what I was into. And when I started telling him about my dresser buddy, he wanted to know his name. It was something innocent like Peter or Patrick, but I can still see him going white in the face. I drew Peter, Patrick, out for him, and the very next day, him and my uncle took out that dresser and burned it. It wasn't until a few years later when I found out my dad's little brother, my uncle, also had the same friend with the same name who lived in the same antique dresser. After a few months of typical imaginary friend shit, my uncle started having night terrors and couldn't sleep because of Peter Patrick. It got so bad that they had to move him out of his room before he managed to get back to normal. Number 2. My wife's mother passed away in 2003 from cancer. After the funeral, family and friends gathered at her house for a final celebration of her life. The gathering went late into the evening. My son, 3 at the time, needed to go to bed at that point. I walked with him up the stairs to where he would sleep. The room that my mother-in-law passed away in was upstairs, and straight down the hallway as you reached the top of the landing. My son and I walked upstairs together, with me holding his hand. As we nearly reached the top of the stairs, my son stopped and wouldn't move. At the point which he could just see down the hallway, he was just staring down the hall. I looked at him, then down the hall to an open doorway to a completely dark bedroom. He just stared and would not move any further. I asked him, "Buddy, are you okay?" His response was,
"Daddy, the light scares me."
I looked again down the hallway where he was staring into darkness. "Buddy, you see a light?"
"Yes, Daddy, it scares me."
I promptly picked him up and went back downstairs. To this day, the hairs still stand on the back of my neck when I think of it. Number 3. When I was 3 or 4, we lived in a 1950s ranch house my parents bought at a sheriff's sale. It was kind of run down, but a bargain because it was only a few blocks from my grandmother's home, on the same block as my sister's school, and my dad could be to work in 5 minutes. Where the side door came into the house from the carport, there was a utility closet. It housed the hot water heater, a furnace, and a trap door down to the crawl space below the house. The utility closet was in a short L-shaped hallway between the kitchen and the den, which we used as a family room. I remember the crawl space always had a dirty water smell to it. The floor of the crawl space wasn't poured concrete, but was composed of loose gravel. My sister would be at kindergarten all day, so it was just me and my mom until it was time to walk to school to get her. I would play alone in the den while my mom was decorating cakes in the kitchen. My mom would hear me carrying on long conversations in the den with my toys. One of my favorite things was to make a cave by lifting the leg rest of the recliner and playing with my toys underneath. It used to annoy my mother because I never put it back down. One day, she asked me why I always did that, and I told her, because the light from the big window hurts their eyes. The light hurts your toys' eyes? No, the 2 little black boys who come out to play with me. That freaked her out. So she talked to my dad about it, and they asked me more about it. I told them I had 2 friends named Pumi and Punky. They were 2 little black boys that lived under the heater in the utility closet. Pumi always wanted to play, but he had to drag Punky along with him because he never wanted to come, but they weren't allowed to ever be apart. They were both terrified of my dad, and they would disappear back into the closet when they would hear him coming. At night, since my dad was home, they were too afraid to come out, so they would fall down into the crawl space and crawl until they were under my room. Sometimes they would whisper jokes to me through the floorboards, but mostly I would just hear them moving around in the gravel. It ended when my mom found me sitting in the utility closet with the door shut. I told her that Pumi and Punky had to leave because a raggedy man who walked along the train tracks at night almost found them. They saw him in our backyard trying to peek through the screen door, so they crawled into the furnace and turned to cinders and flew out through the chimney. Number 4. Me and my friends were driving home from a show we all went to. This was about 7 years ago or so, in the Cerritos area. There's an elementary school there, I think on 186th. I forgot what it's called. Anyway, we drove by a local elementary school, all of us joking and laughing or whatever 16-year-olds do. And my friend's girlfriend looked over at the playground in the school, screamed, and refused to talk to anyone for a few hours. We all asked her what was wrong, what she saw, what happened, but nothing would make her tell us. We all thought she saw someone on the playground or a dead body or something. All we knew was that she was seriously spooked. As a backstory, I should add that she's sensitive to paranormal happenings. I should also add that I don't really believe in ghosts or the like, but whatever. She would have doors fly open at her old house, clothes hanger fly off the rail, cups fall over, and then right themselves multiple times. Just crazy shit. Anyway, she eventually told her boyfriend what she had seen. She said that she had briefly seen a bunch of blood-covered people walking around the playground aimlessly. I immediately started blaming exhaustion, as it was around 2 a.m. when we drove by. We looked it up later, and it turns out that a plane had crashed into the school in the late 80s, and a lot of people had died. Number 5. I was sleeping next to my girlfriend, which is now my wife. She gets up and starts walking around the room with the lights off. About 5 minutes later, she gets back in bed. A few minutes later, I feel a little strange and look over at my wife. She's sitting straight up. I turn the light on and ask her what's wrong. I get no answer, no acknowledgement, except she starts to kind of breathe loudly. I say her name a few more times and get very little back. I start to shake her. I'm really scared she's having a stroke or something, and say her name over and over and over. She finally looks at me and gets this sneer on her face that freaks me the fuck out. This is the first point where I really start to feel like something is really off. I start to say, "What's your name?" as though I'm talking to someone who just hit their head and may not be with it. In other words, I'm asking her to remember her name, to try to draw her out of whatever has her head in the fog. I ask her a few more times, looking in her eyes, when all of a sudden her pupils dilate to the point where they were black. I mean fast too, like from normal to black in a split second. Right after this happens, she says,
"The devil."
It comes out of her in this voice that's not hers. I freak out, grab her, and start praying, like really praying, commanding God to get whatever the fuck had just taken over my wife to get out. About 15 seconds or so, my wife starts crying. I pull back a little, and she just says my name in this terrified, confused little animal voice. I hold her for a few more minutes. Then we talk for a few minutes. She basically says she just felt blackness for a while, then remembers coming to in my arms. That's it. So I'm not even that spiritual of a person, or at least I wasn't until that clusterfuck of a mind-altering night. It all happened so fast, too. I still don't know what really happened, but not a single part of me thinks there's some non-spiritual explanation for it. My wife has never had another experience like that, and I've never had another paranormal experience of any kind. My brother thinks she had a mini stroke or something, and from the outside, I would surely say the same thing. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well for a while, but as nothing has happened since, my life is entirely back to normal. Number 6. My father was a strong man, all muscles and brute strength. He had a hacking cough for a year and was told by his doctors it was nothing to be concerned with and that he was struggling to shake it off due to age and change in lifestyle. He was 63 and recently retired. My mom called me to say that he had collapsed at home in pain and that paramedics were on their way. The next day, the hospital begins to run tests. First, they confirm that the pain is caused by cancer they have found in his spine. Subsequent tests show cancer in his stomach and his lungs. The primary cancer, however, is in his esophagus, and it's stage 4. Too late to do anything for him. The cancer in his spine is dulled by morphine, but this muscle-bound guy loses the ability to walk 14 days after being admitted to the hospital. I go there to see him every day after work between his collapse and his death, just 23 days. The last time I see my father alive, he is in a hospital bed wearing an adult diaper, doped out of his mind. He died later that evening. Now, in addition to weights, my dad loved to tinker with his hands. His workshop was filled to the brim with stuff he had constructed by hand. He spent hundreds of hours in there. I guess it was the place he found himself most at ease with the world. After his death, this workshop lies dormant. No tools being used. His things left where he had last used them. My mom says that she sometimes heard noises coming from there, so as I stay over occasionally, I poke my head in every time I visit to make sure nothing is amiss. One evening, my mom needs to stay at a hospice with a friend who was dying. She asks, will I stay over to look after her pets? I say sure. Around 11 p.m., her dog races into the kitchen and starts barking like crazy. I follow the dog and yell for it to be quiet. And I hear it. The sound of the lathe in the workshop. I go to the workshop and open the door. The room is dark and all is still. I reach for the overhead light pole. The room floods with light and I see him. My father does not stand strong and proud as he usually would in that workshop. He lies sprawled on the floor. He turns his head and does not look at me, but through me. His arms reach forward and he pulls himself across the floor away from me. I back away and run back to the house. Never spoke of this to my mother, but I dread that workshop and now only visit it during daylight hours. My mother still reports she hears noises. Number 7. At about midnight, my father was in the middle of a heart attack. While we were keeping him calm and waiting for the ambulance to arrive, I was looking out the bedroom window, and in the reflection of the window and the mirror near the bed, I could see my grandmother standing by my dad's bed holding his hand. He then told us he was feeling better and the pain in his chest was going. The ambulance arrived 3 minutes after that and he was fine. In the same house, my wife, who had never seen a picture of my grandmother, woke up one night and said she saw an old lady standing at the foot of our bed, smiling. The next day, I showed her a photo of my grandmother, and she went white and said that was who she saw. Number 8. I saw a shadow person once. I didn't know that's what it was called until much later. I was living in a house in Laguna Beach that had been there since the 1920s. In its history, it had been a speakeasy, a brothel, and a house for smuggling illegal immigrants. One day, my new wife and I were having an argument. I can't even recall what it was about. She walked down the block to get a cup of coffee and cool off, and I was alone in the house. The way the place was built was incredibly haphazard. There was a bedroom and living room on one side, then a bathroom with 2 entrances. On the other side of the bathroom was a hallway that had windows in one side and 2 bedrooms on the other. From my bedroom, I could look across the hall into the bathroom, then through the bathroom and down the other hall. I was standing at my dresser, and I just noticed movement out of the corner of my eye and looked down there. There was, and honest to God, this gives me goosebumps just typing it, 17 years later, a black figure. It was maybe 3 feet tall, and it was only vaguely humanoid. It looked like some black scribbles, like someone had scribbled a human shape, but the scribbles moved, like electricity arcing. That's the best way to describe it. There was no sound that I could remember. I distinctly remember when I saw it, I wasn't afraid, just like, what the fuck? Then it noticed me looking at it. I can't say it turned around, it just focused on me, I guess. Then I was scared. I didn't move, didn't scream, nothing. I was just frozen because it just fucking came at me. It rushed down the hall towards me. I have no idea what it intended, but as soon as it entered the bathroom, the door closest to me just slammed shut. Then I screamed. I yelled for my wife. She wasn't home. I went the fuck outside, into the daylight, and didn't go back in until she got home about 10 minutes later. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe I saw something supernatural, but I know I saw something. I just don't know what it was. Number 9. Working late nights as a stage technician for various theaters, I've experienced some unusual happenings. Most theaters carry on an old tradition by setting up a ghost light on stage before closing for the night. While working in an old 1930s era theater, I brought out the ghost light at the end of a very late night. I carried the beautiful and very heavy cast iron ghost light onto the stage in complete darkness, since I had already turned off the work lights. I set the ghost light down on stage and turned it on. I was facing the audience, and when the light clicked on, I saw hundreds of ghostly faces floating just above the backs of each seat, as if it was a house full of ghosts. In a split second, I jumped back in fear, and since I had a hand on the ghost light, I knocked it over. It fell to the stage and smushed the lamp, leaving me in complete darkness again. I froze, knowing they were all still watching me. Seconds later, my coworker turns the work lights back on and asks me if I was okay, because he heard a crash. Number 10. My mom always bought snow globes for my grandma. When my grandma passed away, my mom took them back to her house. My mom put them all up on the shelves that go around the entire living room. A few weeks had passed, and my mom found a video that she wanted my brothers and I to watch because it reminded her of our grandma. We all sat down to watch it, and, of course, near the end of the movie, our mom was crying. Right when the movie ends, all of the snow globes went off at the same time. The figurines didn't move on any of them, just the music. We all huddled together, of course, because we're scared as fuck. And my mom suddenly said, "Mom?" And all of the music stopped. And then the room became extremely cold. My mom suddenly felt really uncomfortable. and had all of us run and get into the car, and she drove us to our godmother's house. She cried for hours until she got a call from our dad saying he'd be home in a few minutes and should head back. When we all got back inside, it was warm again, but all of the snow globes were shattered on the ground except for one. The one that was my grandma's favorite.